Your child's insulin doses for rapid-acting insulin will be made up of two separate parts. One part is called the high blood glucose correction, and the second is the carbohydrate ratio. We will now explain them both. High blood glucose correction is one way to treat hyperglycemia. High blood glucose correction is the amount of rapid-acting insulin given to lower a high blood glucose to your child's target level. The dose is dependent on your child's current blood glucose level and a correction factor. The correction factor is the amount we expect your child's glucose level to decrease when your child receives 1 unit of rapid-acting insulin. For example, if your child's correction factor is 50, this means that for every 1 unit of rapid-acting insulin the child receives, we anticipate the glucose to decrease by 50 points. The correction factor is also known as the insulin sensitivity factor. You may hear your healthcare team use both terms. High blood glucose correction doses should not be given more often than every 2 to 3 hours. Let's look at an example for how to calculate a high blood glucose correction dose. To do this, we will use the following formula. We will take the current blood glucose and subtract 100, the child's target blood glucose. Then we will take that answer divided by the correction factor. If our current blood glucose is 225 and our correction factor is 50, we would take 225 minus 100, which equals 125, and then divide by 50. This then gives us 2.5 units. Some children require half-unit doses of insulin. If this is the case for your child, your provider will discuss dosing with you. The carbohydrate ratio is the amount of carbohydrates 1 unit of rapid-acting insulin is able to metabolize. This is individualized for each child by their provider. For example, if a child's carbohydrate ratio is 1 to 12, this means that the child will receive 1 unit of rapid-acting insulin for every 12 grams of carbohydrates they consume. So, if the child is going to have a 60-gram carbohydrate meal, we would take 60 grams divided by 12 grams to determine how much insulin is needed. In this example, we would need to give 5 units of rapid-acting insulin to cover the carbohydrates. Not all insulin doses will end in a whole number. If this is the case, you will need to round the number to the appropriate dose. Let's review the rules of rounding. Always begin by taking the exact number of units for your child's carb ratio dose and add them to the exact number of units for your child's high blood glucose correction dose. Once you've added them, use the following as a guide to determine how to round your final number. If rounding to a whole unit, take the final number and round down if the number ends in 0.1 to 0.4, or round up if the number ends in 0.5 to 0.9. If rounding to the nearest half unit, take the final number and round down if the number ends in 0.1 to 0.2, round to the half unit if the number ends in 0.3 to 0.7, or round up if the number ends in 0.8 to 0.9. Now let's do one final example, putting it all together. Your child is getting ready for breakfast. Their carb ratio is 1 to 12, and their correction factor is 50. You check their glucose before eating, and it is 246. Your child is going to eat 64 grams of carbohydrates. Begin by calculating the carb dose. To do this, you will take 64 divided by 12 and get 5.33 units. Next, let's calculate the high blood glucose correction dose by taking 246 minus 100, which equals 146, and then divide by 50, and get 2.92 units. We now can add our two doses together and get 8.25 units. Now we will want to round. This child is using whole units of insulin, so we know we can round down to 8 units and then give that dose. In our next video, we will talk about what to do if your child experiences an emergent low glucose level.